So we'll go ahead and get started here. So again, we want to welcome everyone to Environmental Fridays. This is season 9 of Environmental Fridays. It is personal. And if you'd like to get to our website, you could see here in the middle our link, our URL, and at the bottom right-hand corner is a QR code that could get you there as well if you point your camera at it. Here is our schedule for this season 9, this entire semester. We have a wide range of different speakers here, different topics from different places around, not just the United States, but around the world. We have something from Trinidad coming up here pretty soon. Um, so we try to have a nice diversity of topics and personnel. If you want to find out some more about our scheduled guest speakers and the co-hosts for each week, you can again use that QR code at the top left hand corner, top left hand corner. At the bottom right-hand corner, if you want to look at our past videos, all of them, I think now we have 136. We're up to about 136 episodes on YouTube. So this is one of the ways to get to all of those episodes, and you could rummage through them and take a look at them. You can use them for your environmental clubs, whatever. It's free. The only thing I do like to have is some feedback, not only from the live episodes, but if you use the archive, the episodes online, just let us know. Give us some feedback, and we'll also put your feedback on our website. We also want to acknowledge our sponsors, Michigan Eagle, Impact Grants, Caribbean Compass, the American Chemical Society, ACS, Committee on Minority Affairs, long-standing relationship with Benton Spirit Community Newspaper, and we are actually live streaming from the offices of the Benton Spirit in Benton Harbor, Michigan, and GC Scored, which is a social emotional wellness organization, which actually, full disclosure, is my sister's organization. So that's a bit of overview of what's coming up. You'll see more about our speaker and hear more about our speaker today, here soon. We have two more after today, two more episodes in October. Next one next week is going to be on indigenous science and forest resilience. And let me just go back. The last one is going to actually preview the United Nations Climate Change Conference, the 30th. So that should be an interesting one as well. It will preview the UN Climate Change Conference. So, as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, we would really love to get feedback and testimonials from each episode, even if it's a sentence, and send it to me, and we will publish your comments and feedback online. It could include suggestions, comments, um, of whatever nature. Just send that to us so we know that we are having some sort of impact here. At this point, I'd like to introduce our two co-hosts for today. They've met each other and started conversation. Lashita Sayer and Julia Chambers. I'm not going to read all of their bio, but Lashita is the founder and executive director of Women Who Change. That's an interesting, who charge, sorry, who charge, Women Who Charge. That's an interesting play on words there because she is passionate about clean transportation, sustainable transportation, and I guess associated with that is, of course, energy that um, is used in transportation. And so she has also served. You're from Denver area?
That's right. Yep, Denver, Colorado.
Denver, Colorado. So she's also served on the Denver Electric Vehicle Council and the Transportation Subcommittee of the Denver Sustainability Advisory Committee and co-chaired the Colorado EV Coalition Battery Recycling Subcommittee. So she's really deep into clean transportation industry. And in fact, you were telling us that you were in Detroit. Are you still in Detroit right now?
I am just
Uh,
waiting for my flight this afternoon.
and could you tell us quickly what it was about?
Yeah, this was the fourth mobility roadmap conference. So, a lot of policymakers and nonprofits that are also passionate about finding solutions around clean transportation initiatives across the country. So, a nice gathering conference of like-minded folks concerned about how we transition over and away from fossil fuel dependency with our transportation.
Very good, very good. So you'll be hearing her introduce our guest speaker for today. Our other co-host is Miss Julia Chambers. She is the president of a group called A Few Friends for the Environment of the World, AFFEW. And she's been in education for 26 years, elementary and art education teacher, Manistee Public School. So that's up in your area. Is that Ludington's area? Where is
Yeah,
Manistee?
it's just north of Ludington.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. She's owned a small landscape company for 15 years, promoting native plants and organic practices, and founded this organization, A Few Friends, in 1990. So it's a long-standing organization. They have a website that you can check out what they're doing there. She lives on a lake. I'm jealous. In Mason County with her husband Mark, and loves to garden, hike, dance, travel, and volunteer. So these are our two co-hosts for today. So at this point, we would have Lashita, Miss Sayre, introduce our speaker for today.
It is my honor to introduce our speaker for today, Joanne Poole. Joanne is the owner of Sustainable Materials Consulting, where she helps companies integrate sustainable materials into their products and bring them to market faster. She is also an executive and fractional chief science and strategy officer for the Proper Group. With over 20 years of experience in polymer science, product development, and sustainable material innovation, she has led the successful launch of over 10 products across consumer goods, bioplastics, and regulated industries. Her expertise bridges the critical gap between technical material innovation and product development. Joanne helps organizations select and integrate sustainable materials, leveraging deep expertise in bioplastics, eco certifications, and green claims. She advises companies on navigating material trade-offs to accelerate development and bring sustainable products to market faster. Thank you for joining us, Joanne.
Thank you, Lashida.
All right.
See. Can you see my screen? Oh, no.
Not yet.
There we go.
Okay. Yep. Got it now. Seeing it now.
There, there we go. Okay, well, as Lashita said, I have a PhD in polymer science, and I have throughout my career brought a lot of different products to market. But one of my jobs that was super exciting and I really enjoyed probably the most was I worked for a small bioplastic startup in Vancouver, British Columbia about 10 years ago. And recently, I've transitioned back into helping companies in the area of bioplastics. And so, helping look at what materials they have and what those are. And what I'm going to talk about today is really what are bioplastics? What do they do? Maybe you've heard the term. Maybe it's um, there's been kind of a positive and negative thoughts about it, but maybe you've never even heard the term. So I'm going to first start a little bit with what are plastics before we kind of get into bioplastics, just to make sure we all have the same vocabulary, and then we'll go from there. So when we start, before we talk even about plastics, we talk about polymers. And so DNA is a polymer. We're all familiar with DNA in our body. Polypropylene, like the containers, your yogurt containers and some other containers, are also a polymer, but only one of them becomes plastic. So first, what is a polymer? So when we talk about the word polymer, poly means many and mer means units. So you can think of it as like a long chain. So if you were to have little building blocks that are all, whoops, sorry, little building blocks that are all connected here. And so little chains of repeating units. So it's a large molecule of these repeating units. So if you have something like polystyrene, we talk about polystyrene foam, you have a big chain of molecules that are made up of little styrenic repeating units. Polypropylene is the same way. Polypropylene has little propylene units that repeat. So think of it as a big chain made up of the same similar repeating units. DNA is similar. When we talk about base pairs, you have a repeating backbone, and those base pairs hang off of the backbone. So polymers, understanding polymers, it's the foundation for everything that follows their molecular architecture, both traditional and bio-based. So it's really important to understand when we get into bioplastics, understanding that when I talk about repeating units, those little repeating units that will become important when we start talking about bioplastics and some of those more subtle definitions. Um, so polymers in everyday life, right? I've talked about polypropylene, right? So you have a chain of molecules. They're used in textiles, they're used in containers, automotive parts. DNA and protein are natural polymers, and so they occur naturally. Whereas polypropylene, you start with oil, and then you create the propylene repeating units, and then you polymerize them into a polymer. So that is how we get polypropylene plastic, whereas DNA and protein and RNA are made naturally, and those molecules exist in nature already. And it's important to know that all plastics are polymers, but not all polymers are plastics. So I'm going to get into the definition of what is a plastic. A lot of us will think of plastic as the plastic bags or the other that something that comes in the mail and you see a plastic um, thermoform. It's that container that holds the material in there. So we'll talk a little bit about what is a plastic and that definition. So, when I talk about plastic, one of the things that a lot of people think of is are materials that come from oil, and they think that is a plastic, and that the negative, and there's some positive benefits plastic has brought us in terms of being lightweight versus using things like glass or other materials. But when we talk actually about plastic, there's two things I'm going to talk about. One is really the term plastic comes from the term thermoplastic. And so in the world of polymer science, we also have thermosets, we have elastomers, but thermoplastics, really thermo means heat, and plastic comes from the Greek term plastikos, which means being capable of being shaped. So when we talk about thermoplastics, we're talking about plastics that when you add heat, or polymers when you add heat, they were able to change shape. So if you think of something that actually isn't a plastic, it would be rubber, right? So a rubber band, if you heat it up, it actually will degrade before you can't reshape it by adding heat to it. If you've ever used epoxy, so if you've gone to the hardware store and you see that there's two-part epoxy and you mix them together, you're doing a project, you can't heat that. That's a thermoset. That would be an example of a thermoset material. And if you were to heat it up, it actually would burn. It wouldn't change shape. So thermoplastics, if you have those plastic containers and were to add some heat to them, they actually start to crinkle, they change shape. And thermoplastic is a material that becomes pliable when heated and solidifies when cooled. And this feature is important in terms of making different types of products. So when you think of your a soda bottle, I'm going to talk a little bit about blow molding for a second. So a soda bottle is actually made from what we call a preform. So this here, this test tube looking container is actually um, a, a, a material that's been injection molded. So you melt the plastic and you turn it into this test tube looking thing. And then you blow heat into it, and then there's a shape around it, and you get a plastic bottle. So again, going back to that thermoplastic behavior, if you didn't have that plasticky behavior in terms of being able to be molded with heat, you wouldn't be able to create a soda bottle. So those thick walled preforms get heated and turned into a blow mold, into a bottle. So that's one example. There's a lot of different technologies that give us the plastic containers and plastic materials that we have and use today. So that's just one of them. And then another term that we talk about where the word plastic comes from. Plastic is actually a materials definition. So in material science, we have a stress strain curve. And what that means is if you take a material or I'm going to actually be using the plastic bag here. Let's make sure this. So if you were to put this, and there's a machine called an instron, and you pull on it, you you are measuring how much strain you get when how much stress comes out. And actually what we see is we have a region called the plastic deformation region. And so what that means is if I were to take this plastic bag and I pull on it and I let it go, and I know I haven't really pulled on it very much, but there's like a tiny bit of give if you've ever taken a plastic bag. There's some give and you let go. But if you pull on it enough, it will stop. See, it's now deformed, right? I'm sure we've all played with plastic bags and seen like if we pull on them, we get to a point where they stop deforming. And what that means is you've gone beyond the plastic deformation range. So this is actually a material property, which means that it comes back. Certain materials are able to do that. And we have another curve under here, the elastic region. You can imagine that you have a rubber band, and if you pull it and let go of it, it'll come back to its original shape. Whereas plastic materials, if you pull it too far, they won't come back to shape. So this is a material property that we talk about with plastic. And the reason why I kind of stop on these things is culturally, when we think of plastic, we think of, oh, those plastic containers that are out there, they come from oil and they don't degrade. And so that is what we have as a cultural definition of what a plastic is. And I'm just trying to orient you that it's actually, when we talk about plastic, it's something that can be formed, and it has this property, whereas if you go beyond it, you get beyond the plastic deformation range. So as a polymer scientist, I don't see like everything that comes from oil, that cultural definition. And that's what I want to challenge you today to think about differently as we get into bioplastics and why we talk about these differently. So that's really kind of the core. Like I'm going to be venturing into the area of plastic that are not made from oil and what that means, right? So before I get into bioplastics, let's first talk about what's a biopolymer. So going back, we talked about DNA as a polymer and polypropylene. So what's good is these are polymers that exist in nature. And so here I talked about DNA. This is an example of protein structures. So protein is made from RNA, and you get the protein, whether it's the protein you eat or the protein in your bodies, it's the same idea, but it is a big molecule. It is a polymer. This is an example of some seaweed, and within seaweed you can find starch and you can find alginates, which are a type of polymer that are found in nature. And then even in crabs, in the hard shell of the crab, we have a polymer called chitosan. So these are all important because I'm going to talk about within bioplastics, um, where some of these might come from. But not all of these biopolymers, going back to my original statement, all plastics are polymers, but not all polymers are plastics. So this is also important in here. So when we're talking about natural biopolymers from biology to materials, so what we see is actually we're able to take these polymers that are in nature and we're able to extract them as a big long molecule. So they haven't been chopped into little pieces. We're extracting them as their big molecule, and we're able to turn them into plastic materials. So polyhydroxyalkanates and polyhydroxybutirates are actually made from bacteria. So they grow the bacteria up and they extract out the PHAs and PHBs. We've seen these materials actually used in medical applications. PHAs and PHBs are really interesting materials because they do naturally degrade in the environment. Starches as well are, so when we talk about starches, I'm sure you've heard people talk about starchy food, right? Like your potatoes and your corn. So what's happening in there is you have this big helical structure, big molecule, starch molecule. It's a carbohydrate. And you extract them and then process them still in their big molecular form. They get reprocessed and can be turned into plastics. So some biopolymers can become plastics, but materials like DNA and RNA are have not been ever there's not a efficient way, as well as like material properties don't exist for that. Or like RNA, we have little enzymes on our hand that actually degrade a RNA, so you wouldn't be able to make them. So, but materials like PHAs, PHBs, modified starches, you can actually see them at commercial scale today. And some of them may actually, if you've ever come across, I don't know, one of the challenges as I give a bioplastic talk is I never know which part of the country has as much exposure to compostable plastic. So I live in Seattle. We have a really great composting infrastructure, and we actually are one of the few areas that you can actually compost compostable plastic. So maybe you've seen at a football game or something that has a little green stripe around it and it says compostable, and you think it's a plastic container. Why is it compostable? So I'm going to talk about composting plastic in a second, as well. So going into that definition, what is a bioplastic? And I'm going to talk a little bit about where some of this definition comes from. So a bioplastic, I talked a little bit about PHAs, PHBs, starches, alginates as well. They're polymers that are derived in nature, and we're able to extract them and turn them into something that has a plastic material, going back to that definition of what is a plastic, right? There's also another one that I would just call bioplastics. So when we talk about plastic coming from oil, we make those repeating units come from oil and we polymerize them and turn them into plastic. There are some types of bioplastics that instead of coming from oil, that those little units, those repeating units come actually from um, bio-based, we would say bio-based feedstock. So when we talk about feedstock, we're either talking about petrochemical feedstock, which means we get the chemicals come from oil, or you can get them actually from nature. So polylactic acid is actually a very common compostable bioplastic that you see in containers today. So if you pick up a plastic compostable container and you look on the bottom of it, and I'm sure you've seen the little recycling symbols. And if it says 7 and it says underneath it PLA, it's actually made out of polylactic acid. And polylactic acid, those little repeating units of lactic acid, just like the lactic acid in your body, um, are made from corn, can be made from sugarcane. So its feedstock is from, not, instead of being from oil, it's from nature. And it has a chemistry that also enables it that if it's an industrial composter, it can compost. And that's important. We're going to talk about that capability isn't always inherent in a bioplastic, but it's also just good to know like that PLA has that capability. Um, and so this is a bio-based material, and this is an example of the reason why I've stopped on this for so long is I can make a polymer that the repeating units, those little repeating units are from nature, but I didn't take that polymer out of nature and extract it into a plastic. I actually took the repeating units from nature, I turned it into a polymer, and now I have a bioplastic. And I'm going to talk about some other types of bioplastics that aren't compostable in a second. And then there's another bioplastic that we have that are degradable materials, which means that you can compost them. They degrade in the environment. And this is a category, I'm not going to lie, I don't really love it because it's actually, these are materials that are oil-based, but they're degradable. And so things like PBAT, polycaprolactone, I'll talk about those in a second. But in the official definition, those are included. They're petrochemically based, which means they're from oil, and but they're compostable and degradable. So European Bioplastics has had a definition for over 10 years, really, of how they've defined bioplastics. Some of us all agree that that's the definition of what a bioplastic is. So they say it's a material that are bio-based, biodegradable, or both. So it doesn't have to necessarily be, that's why PBAT, PCL, those are materials that are not bio-based, but they are biodegradable. And it's important to understand these two distinct back pathways because origin, and I'm going to talk about this all the time as I go through. Origin is not necessarily mean end of life. Meaning if I have a bioplastic, it does not mean it degrades. Okay. So I'll come back to that in a second around some materials that are actually the same material that you see in traditional oil material, and it has the same properties, meaning it doesn't degrade, but it comes from nature. So going back, remember we've got when we talk about two different categories of bioplastics that come from nature in a way, you have polymers that are already built by nature, like your polyhydroxy alkanates, your starches, those are already built by nature, and we've extracted them as a big polymer. We also have materials that we take the raw material from nature instead of oil, and then we polymerize it and turn it into a polymer, and that's also a bioplastic. And then we have the other one that it's degradable, but it's actually oil-based. But it's good to keep those two in mind. The origin, when we talk about is it from nature, whether the building blocks or the polymer, does not equal end of life. So this is the matrix that we talk about with bioplastics. So over here, I have things that are not biodegradable, and I have things that are biodegradable. So this is so when we talk about conventional plastics, we're talking about our polyethylene, our polypropylene. So if you have a polypropylene in the wintertime to keep you warm, a shirt, it's made up of polypropylene, same material that you get those to-go containers or your yogurt containers, but they're just made into a textile. So this is what we would think of, and when people think of plastic and going back to that cultural definition of plastic, people think of this. It's not biodegradable. It has a poor end of life. It comes from oil. Culturally, we think that's what all plastic is, but that's actually not true. In terms of end of life, isn't necessarily always from oil, and that's what we want to think. But also in the term of bioplastics, we have bioplastics that so we can actually make polyethylene. So this bag is a type of polyethylene. Your milk jugs that are plastic is a type of polyethylene. You can actually make polyethylene from sugar cane. So its origin, meaning that those ethylene units that make up the polymer come from sugar cane instead of oil. But the end of life is the same as traditional polyethylene. It doesn't degrade. So that's where I say that the origin of it doesn't dictate that it's going to be compostable, it's going to be degradable. We also see, and actually we have a material that we've all has always been bio-based is nylon. Not all nylon, mind you, just some of the nylon that we have comes from castor bean oil. And that has always been its origin as castor bean oil. So it's good to know that you can make um, materials that come from nature, meaning, and this is usually true, that if you take the repeating units, those little chemistry units, and then we polymerize them and turn them into another material, its end of life just depends on the chemistry. We'll talk about that as well. Then we have bioplastics that are biodegradable and bio-based, right? So I talked about the polyhydroxyalkanates and the polyhydroxybutirates and the starches that come from, we've extracted those polymers and they are degradable. They're compostable. Polyhydroxyalkanates and butyrates, if they're made in a similar way, they can actually be marine degradable. So those plastic bags you would find in the ocean, those would degrade if they were made from PHAs and BHBs. Polylactic acid is an example of we make the feedstock, the repeating units come from sugar of some sort, whether it's corn or sugarcane. And it can be composted, and PLA is an interesting material. It has the chemistry and such that it can be composted, but it needs to be an industrial composter. So PHAs and PHBs can be, some of them can actually be composted in your backyard, whereas PLAs require an industrial composter. And that's when one of the challenges with adoption of bioplastics is they can be composted, but you need this industrial composting infrastructures. And then we have the category I've never completely loved, but they are degradable materials, but they're oil-based. I think that always causes a little, I'm like, well, they degrade, but they're oil. Why are we calling it a bioplastic? But this is the definition. I'm not the inventor of the definition, but it's good to know that the chemistry is what's important in these things, right? So compostable bioplastics, I've talked a little bit about some of the different kinds, right? Polylactic acid, polyhydroxyalkanates, these alginates made from seaweed. There's a lot of really cool startups that are finding different types of materials that can be composted. So composting, when I say compostable bioplastics, I'm usually referring to the industrial composting capabilities. But this is where some of the challenges of bioplastic adoption have come into place because of are we, by using these types of materials instead of oil-based materials, there's two things that it has the potential for, right? We're not using oil, which means you're decreasing your carbon footprint, decreasing our reliance on oil, so that's a good thing. And then we're improving the end of life, but this is where it gets controversial because not everywhere has access to compostable composting infrastructure. And so things like PLA traditionally have been a cheaper bioplastic and has been used quite a bit, but it does require an industrial composter, whereas things like polyhydroxybutirates that come from bacteria, they have the enzymes already in the environment. And so if those were to get into the environment, they do actually break down because of the chemistry and the chemistry around us in terms of the environment. But those are actually they're very interesting materials, but they're pretty expensive to make. So they're around. We just don't see them as often. So that's one kind. And then I talked a little bit about bio-based conventional plastics. So going back, they also, I talked about some bio nylon. So nylon 6,6 and some polyamides. Nylons are a classification of what we call polyamides. They're made from castor oil instead of petroleum. Biopolyethylene, again, I'm making this plastic bag, but its feedstock instead of using oil is sugar, but its end of life is the same as what we always see in terms of it doesn't degrade. It has the same material properties because it's the same material. So this is where sometimes people get confused with bioplastics because it sounds better, but it's really like focusing on, again, that origin. It does not mean end of life. Bio-PET is an interesting one because, again, you're making so your soda containers, those are your polyethylene terephthalate, that's our soda bottles, those types of containers. So when you make a PET bottle from bio-based sources, it still has that recycling capabilities. It doesn't change its recyclability because it's the same polymer. So remember when we talked about polymers being little repeating units, we're talking about, okay, no, those repeating units now come from, instead of oil, they come from biosources. So these are what we would call in the industry a drop-in bioplastic, meaning the material property is exactly the same, the processing is exactly the same, versus trying to use a new material like a PLA or a PHB. Um, and then we talked about there's a surprising category and compostable petrochemical plastics. So polybutyrate, adipate, terephthalate, PBAT, polycaprolactone. These are materials I've seen them predominantly like they can be used as I've seen them used almost like as a carrier material. So starches are used. People like to try to use starches because you have potatoes and then you extract the starch. But starch as a plastic material doesn't have the best material properties. It doesn't like to film form. You have processing problems. Trying to actually make it into a plastic container can be difficult. And so a lot of times people will mix them with materials like PBAT, PCL, and yet they're certified compostable. And I should be clear in terms of what is certified compostable. Whatever a polymer inherently doesn't, it has the capability of being compostable, but until you've taken that actual material, like end product, and tested it to be compostable, you need to they can be compostable, meaning that that form factor does impact whether or not something is compostable. So these materials qualify as bioplastics, and we talked about that, but it's again, they're biodegradable, not about their origin, right? And sorry to hammer on this, but I really want, I mean, if you take one thing away, or two things, like all polymers are not, all plastics are polymers, but not all polymers are plastic. And origin of the material does not mean end of life. So if you walk away and you're like, what did I learn? I learned that bioplastics, where it comes from, does not dictate its end of life, right? So we have bio-based materials from corn and other materials. I talked about a lot of different things that we call bioplastics, and some of them are compostable. Some of them are degradable. We even have a few that are oil-based and can be composted. We also have some bio-based materials that go into the landfill or they're recycled, right? So that's that origin of it, whether it comes from nature, doesn't necessarily mean its end of life is better. But the benefit in general of these origin from bio-based materials, bio origin, whether it's a biopolymer, is we are reducing our reliance on oil. And then these oil-based bioplastics we're now able to get if they were to go in the landfill, they will degrade. If they go into the environment, those ones will degrade. So there is a benefit. So just keeping in mind that chemistry of the polymer and the chemistry of the enzymes that are around us, that's what determines the end of life, not the origin. So, talked a lot about PET. That's our soda bottles and other things. So this is that key insight. I know I've kind of hammered on this, but it's really around like that material end of life is what's important about that. So the chemistry of your material determines its destiny, and that's what is important to think about. So kind of to, kind of starting to wrap up what I've been talking about really is like when we talk about plastic and you think about plastic, as a material scientist, it's a material property. It's not the cultural definition in my head of what a plastic is. A plastic does not mean it is origin is always oil. It can, as I've said today, it can be made from um, it can be a polymer that we found in nature that we've turned into a plastic. It can be a plastic that's been created and its origin, actually, its feedstock is that. So plastic is a material property, and what it means, it can be shaped, right? Plastic bags, we create these films. We heat up the material and we stretch them into films, or we have um, the as I talked about with the bottles and those preforms. So they when you add heat to them, you're able to create a shape. It's a structure. Polymer is a structure. So when we talk about, a many unit big molecule, think about your proteins and your DNA. We like those are really visual things that I know I learned in school, but it's a long repeating molecular unit. Bio-based is a source. So oil is a source, bio-based is a source. And bioplastics combine these concepts, right? We have oil-based materials that are degradable. We have bio-based materials that are non-degradable. So thinking about these things when we talk about that complete picture, that's why we need to understand like plastic is a material property. It's not a feedstock. It's not an end of life. So just culturally, we tend to think of things that don't degrade as plastic. That's not always true. Um, so bioplastics are that family of materials united by sustainability goals, whether it's decreasing your carbon footprint, whether it's we want a material, there's different category where we could choose a material that's compostable, has specific properties, sources, and end of life pathways. So those are the things to remember when we're talking about the different distinctions. We've got a plastic as a material property, is molecular structure, and where it's from. So terminology really matters, and that's really what I wanted to take home today is really understanding when we have this terminology of bioplastic, what does that really mean? And then that source versus end of life. We have different ways of getting to sustainability, whether it's reducing our oil use, whether it's our end of life is now compostable. There's a lot of options. So understanding these different fundamentals of like how you create a plastic and those sorts of things helps with waste management, material choices. How are we making different choices? Because one of the things I didn't spend actually enough time on is like plastic has some really good properties. And one of the things that is challenging, and I can equally say like plastic in the colloquial term, the plastic that does not degrade in our life is problematic. We need to find other solutions. But plastic as a material has also brought us so far forward in terms of innovation, in terms of being able to ship things. The fact that you're able to get things from other countries, just a lot of it has to do with you're able to lightweight those containers as you ship them and you're able to move them around versus using glass, using paper. Sometimes paper, we pay nowadays you see a lot of times paper's being used instead of plastic, and that has its trade-offs as well. Paper's very water intensive and it has some other challenges. So always trying to keep like that balance in mind and look at the big picture when we see things as becoming more sustainable. Ask the question, what does it mean to be more sustainable? Is it really, right? So that's one of the things to just keep in mind. So that's all I have for you today. And if you have any questions, I'd love to answer some more questions. Thank you.
All right. Okay, Julia.
Okay, Joanna, thank you so much. It really cleared up a lot of my questions. And I'm sure I did see in the chat there were some questions, and I have some questions, but very interesting and very informative. It's a lot to take in. I'm glad they're recorded.
Thank you.
It'd be good to share with a lot of people.
Mm.
So I don't know, Desmond, do we work with the chat first or?
Yeah, if you have comments, questions, we could go to the questions in the chat. So yeah, a mix.
Let's see. One is how do recycling numbers relate to the origin of and to origin or end of
In the-
life?
Yeah. Um, okay, so recycling numbers are related to the type of polymer. Okay. So your number one, what you see in soda bottles, right? That's polyethylene terephthalate. Your number two and your number four are types of polyethylene. Your number three is I keep trying to say PCL, but it's not. I have blanked on what threes are, but they're usually what are in your laundry detergent because they don't interact. Your five is a polystyrene. Your six is actually six is polystyrene and five is polypropylene, and then seven is the other category. So those one through six have designations of what type of material that they are. And then going to your question of how does it relate to origin or end of life? It isn't related to, it tells you what kind of, if it can be, whether it can be recycled or it tells the recycler what it is. We actually only recycle a few of the numbers. We recycle ones, twos, and fours. Fives are a little iffy. There's not very many places that will recycle fives. And six is which are polystyrenes are really not recycled all that much. So that just tells you those recycling numbers tell you what kind of material it is. But you can imagine when I talked about bio-based polyethylene, so that origin, you could have it would still be a two or a four, depending on the type of polyethylene, if it came from sugar cane. It would still have that recycling, that there's biopolyethylene terephthalate, which is your number one, your PET bottles. You can have partially bio-based, meaning like part of the polymer is actually bio-based. It still has the same exact material properties, so it is still recycled in the same way. So what is changed? So the one through five, one through six, their end of life is the same. If they're not recycled, they get landfilled, right? They don't have a degradable end of life. Now, sevens is this other category, and it can be anything. It can be a lot of your engineering. And when I talk about engineering polymers, talking about things that like you have durable goods, your computer are you've got plastic parts on them. A lot of times that's your nylons, your and other types of materials that are not for packaging. So one through six is different types of packaging. Seven is a category they're not really recycled in large quantities, I should qualify. But their end of life for one through six right now, their end of life is they're either getting recycled or they end up in the landfill. They don't degrade. And so again, this is where culturally this term plastic, that's what we think of is those one through sixes. They don't degrade. Oh, that's what plastic is. But this is where this category, and actually, if you see compostable bioplastic in containers, which they do exist in some places, they'll on the bottom it'll actually say seven. So it's the other category, it doesn't have its own category, and it will say PLA under it. And so that then needs to be composted. I hope I answered that question.
Okay.
Yeah, that was in the chat.
So I also have a couple of questions. Um, First, could you talk a little bit more about paper? Because as and well, I'll tell the audience who may not, some of the audience, paper, of course, is the material is cellulose. Um, the units that you were talking about in the polymer cellulose is glucose, sugar.
Mhm.
And in fact, cellulose is the most abundant natural polymer in the world, right? Looking at your trees and plants and stuff, that's what makes these trees and plants sturdy, wood, all
Mhm.
of that. So based on what you're saying, cellulose made from sugar um, is a biopolymer, but it's not a plastic. Just
Correct.
from our own everyday life, we could
We,
see that as an example that
well,
distinguishes.
in the example you've given that we've taken cellulose and we've turned it into paper, in that example,
Mhm,
that's true. It's not, you haven't taken that biopolymer and you've turned it into something else. You haven't turned it into a plastic because it doesn't have a plastic material property.
mhm,
And I'm gonna butcher this. I'm trying to remember the way it goes. There is a way to take cellulose and you turn it into injection molding. And I think you might not be able to quote me on this one. The the clear part on a hammer
mhm,
originally, like that's one of the early polymers, like one of the early like plastic polymers
mhm.
is from a type of cellulose.
Okay.
So you can, so again, it comes back to when you take a biopolymer from nature and then we process it and then we turn it into a material that has plastic qualities. Cellulose from like wood in itself has so many layers of different polymers that are in there that you have to
Right.
like strip it out and
Right.
pull out those polymers. Like they're how wood is actually like created is pretty complicated
It
in and
is.
of itself. And so you can
Mhm.
see it as like lots of different types of biopolymers. And then you get these, fancy chemists who can come in and do really cool things and turn them into different materials.
Right. But for the, in our ordinary day life, right? The examples we know that we use, paper, wood, that's used in housing and stuff. The normal everyday life experiences, those are examples of a use of a biopolymer,
Yes, that's
right?
not plastic.
So what you're saying too, though, in addition to that, is that cellulose could be converted into plastic,
Hmm.
right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Right. And I see a question around microplastics, right? So that's been a big concern in today's and understandably. So microplastics come from a lot of microplastics. There's a couple different categories that we see microplastics. And one of them is from clothing. So the synthetics that you have, so your polypropylene, your spandex material, which is a type of rubber, those are what happens when you wash your clothes is they shed and it turns into microplastics, right? So that's one source of it in marine environments in the ocean, some of that material from the microplastics comes from packaging material that has ended up in the ocean and it's degraded over time. So, and I shouldn't say that plastic given enough time it will degrade. But like right now what we're seeing, we get these microplastics. So how would we decrease it? One would be with clothing is to use less synthetic material. Propylene is such a common one. Polyesters, we use a lot of polyester now. It's cheap. It's really like so cheap clothing that has a lot of polyester in it. If we can start getting back into natural materials, your wools, your cotton, again, those materials, because of not because they're necessarily from nature, but they have a material property that enables them that when they do end up in nature, they will shed. You don't end up with these microplastics. So I'd say the two ways to there's other sources, but I don't have. We'd have to talk about microplastics on their own. That's its own
Mhm.
topic. But I would say if you in your life are looking for how do I decrease it, it's using less conventional, plastic in containers that don't, making sure that your plastic containers degrade. That would be one of them, or degrade in the environment. So certain types of bioplastics would fit that bill. So that would be one avenue. And the other one would be getting away from polyesters, getting away from, but we love I was for a while I was trying to get away from that. It's really hard. We love, you love the stretchy material in the clothing that you have. We've gotten really used to having spandex in our clothing, and I've seen companies who don't have that little extra stretch, people complain about it because your clothes doesn't they don't bounce back, right? Imagine wearing a pair of jeans without any spandex, and I'm like, we used to have to do that. We are, like, and that's how jeans used to be made, right? And so
Mhm.
nowadays all your pants have spandex in it. So it's getting away from materials that don't degrade in your clothing. That would be another way. And I see a hand
So,
up.
so before you go from that point though, would it be correct to say that bioplastics or some bioplastics offers not the solution, but a solution
Well,
to plastic pollution, including microplastics?
Bioplastics as a category, some of them, not all of them, do
Right,
offer
some.
a solution. And that also includes that category I don't love, but we do call them bioplastics. They're oil-based, but they're degradable. So yes, there are different materials within that category of what we call a bioplastic that can address end-of-life issues, for sure.
Okay, all right.
Nice.
Bridget?
Yeah.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for this very important presentation of this topic. I have a couple of questions. One, when you refer to oil-based, are you speaking of oil immediately extracted from the ground, or are you referring to derived oil, oil after processing? Uh,
So oil has to be processed in terms, yeah. So you process it into you process it into those little monomer units. So from oil, we get ethylene, we get propylene, we get styrene, but you don't get
Mhm.
it out of the ground. What comes out of
Right.
the ground needs to be, and I've lost the term for it, but you need to,
Fractional distillation has to take
yeah.
place. There's a whole, yeah,
There's a whole process. So when I say oil based, it's not, you can't just go to the ground and then turn it, and there's one step to turn it into a polymer. You have to first turn it into all the different little monomer
yeah,
units, and then you polymerize it. You have a process to polymerize it, and then you make a plastic from it.
all
right.
right, then can you probably weigh in on why you don't care for oil-based stuff?
Just getting away from the reliance on oil.
Mm-hmm.
And could
It's
you
a
go a little further?
non-renewable material. Oil is a non-renewable
Right. Yeah,
material.
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. My last question would be then, when you say we, are you referring to the USA, uh, or are you referring to the scientific community? Who's we?
Can you
We don't do, I mean, when you're saying that, is this whole management of plastic uh, uh, organized and managed on an international scale, or
Well, there's not an organizing entity, which is kind of part of the, you could argue, is part of the problem. We have a
Right.
lot of regulatory frameworks which
Correct.
drive how we, in Europe, we have law where we have regulations around primary packaging, California with its extended producer responsibility laws. So that shapes the policy, which drives what manufacturers do. But in terms of we collectively, when we talk about who uses plastic, it's really, I would say, anybody who is a consumer indirectly drives that. There isn't a governing body.
Right.
Right.
And do you source your sugar from the US or is it an international exchange?
When it depends on the company.
Okay.
So
Okay.
polyethylene, a lot of the biopolyethylene, that is a Brazilian company
Yeah.
who's making sugar cane. They take sugar cane from Brazil. There's
Mm.
another company that makes polylactic acid from sugar cane, but it's actually a European company. There's NatureWorks, which makes polylactic acid, so from sugar from corn, and that's actually in the Midwest. So it really depends on the
Mm.
company when we talk about sugar. It can be anything from corn to sugar cane. It depends on where the company was founded and really like kind of the backbone of that company, to be honest.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
You're welcome.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah, what you were referring to earlier with clothes and clothing is sometimes referred to as the fast fashion
Mhm.
Mm,
industry. And I don't, they're making, tons and tons of money. The consumers love and love and love the products. I mean, it's going to be a revolution in a way to make that change, which is part of what impacts um, microplastics and now nanoplastics as
mm.
well.
Yeah, yeah,
So that's we kind of yeah, we definitely we meaning humans here created this problem both on the producer and consumer side.
yeah.
I'm not sure it's going to change unless
Uh,
there
If
is some kind of revolution in
if I
the
may,
world.
Dr. Murray, do we eat plastic? Do we consume plastic in terms of ingest?
Your
Well, the
research,
the
yeah,
biopla yeah, the microplastics, you
is
get it into
is
your food.
everywhere. It's
Yeah,
everywhere. Oh,
yeah.
absolutely. Just look it up online. I don't think,
Microplastics is horrifying.
yeah, it's everywhere. Um, and I don't think I have anyone speaking about it this year, but we've had that topic in the past as well. But it's still very relevant
Yeah,
today.
and I see a question about how would we reduce the microplastic issue. It's really like I would say one of the major categories of microplastic has to do with clothing. So
Mm-hmm.
getting
Mm-hmm.
away from materials that don't degrade. Like even as much as like, I don't know if we can get away from not having like a little bit of spandex and things, but even getting away from polyester
Mm-hmm.
materials, like polyester is one of the big problems. So I'd say like if you personally want to look for something, natural materials, right? So you want things made from cotton, but people, I mean, the challenge is like cotton material in the middle of the winter. You don't want to wear that, right? It doesn't feel good.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of you, I think, are in Michigan, and so like that's cold. So,
Mm-hmm.
but that's where wool is fantastic. Like, so get out your wool materials, and so it's really around material choices
Mm-hmm.
within that. So,
Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
sure that
Are
we
there?
could go
Uh-huh.
we could go another half an hour to an hour talking about this. There's lots of questions, but thank you so much.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I hope that was really helpful. And as you look at your materials and you look at the news, you ask questions. So like that's it, greenwashing right now is really problematic. And some of it comes from ignorance in terms of what's going on, but and we talked about microplastics. I see so much what I call greenwashing of like, oh, we're reducing our microplastics in this and that. I'm like, that's not even a source of microplastics. So be really mindful as you see these really exaggerated comments, like be curious, like what are they talking about? So, hopefully this gives you some tools to start asking questions.
What do you mean by greenwashing?
So I'm going to use an example, like there's a common one right now in the beauty industry of like we don't use microplastics in our beauty products.
Mm-hmm.
That's been outlawed for years. So there's this like, well, we don't do that, implying that they are currently still being used. That would
Oh,
be an example of like, but also like the plastics that were in there historically, the little beads, that's not our source of microplastics. So it makes you
right,
feel
right,
like I just bought this face cream and I'm doing a better thing for the environment. And you are trying to do the right thing. We all need to take our part. But I don't like the companies who are trying to fearmonger you into buying their product when
right,
reality is like maybe we need to like look at other aspects and other avenues of what is because another actually major cause of bio micro I didn't talk about this is rubber. And you know what they come from? It's
Yeah,
EV
tires.
EV cars.
mm,
And so like we're trying so it's a complicated problem and I'm not saying there's an easy way to fix it, but
right.
it's just we have to be educated and just anybody who's trying to fearmonger you into buying a product that's going to sell like always ask, what are you trying to sell me? So,
So yeah, I don't know if I would call it fear mongering. I would say they're giving us false information. Like,
but that's
isn't
where
that
and
kind of
that's
like
why I
the
would say it's
greenwashing?
greenwashing.
Yeah, yeah,
Greenwashing
yeah.
is
Now I understand what you mean by greenwashing. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Gotcha.
because that's a trend, right? A lot of companies know that if they say that this product is green, it's bio-based and all that type of stuff, regardless of whether it's true or not, for their product, they would have some sort of competitive economic advantage.
Yeah, and that's where, and I, I can't really get into it right now, but this is where like meaningful eco labels, n
Yeah.
not every eco label is meaningful, but
Hmm.
meaningful eco labels that have the testing and the certification and they are meaningful, that's where those become important, right? And so I do have experience, and that's one of the things I'm trying to help companies with is meaningful and backed by science
Right.
claims around green claims. That's really like one of the things I'm trying to help companies be making rather than just saying it's natural. Like natural doesn't mean anything.
Right. Right.
Like and like
Because
cyanide is natural too. So let's not be
exactly.
I
careful.
agree. I agree.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway,
Madam, are you familiar with MSDS?
I am, yes.
Yes.
Do you participate in that process?
Well, when you create a product, a lot of chemistry-based products require it's just a material
Hmm.
safety data sheet.
Hmm.
So yeah, you have to, certain products require that
Yeah.
for putting it on the market.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other comments or questions?
I was wondering if there was, if we had some other questions, could we contact you, Joanna, or go through
Absolutely.
Joanna?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes you need to let this
Yeah.
soak in. And I wrote lots of notes, and our group tries to educate the public here in the West Michigan area, and we have a lot of people that are concerned about this. So this is very good information, and I will put it on Facebook and things like that so people can watch this. And
I appreciate that. Thank you
yeah.
so much.
Eh, So I'll push it a little bit more. Any questions from our Caribbean people here? Um, I'm pretty sure, microplastics and all of this is a problem. I know, for example, there are some places, is it Castara in Tobago, that's a really model in terms of plastic pollution. They essentially banned it. Len, do you have any insight on that?
No, I don't. I
Yeah,
don't.
I think it's Castara has a really, really good record. In fact, I was trying to get them on here a couple of years ago. I'll still continue. as a model community in terms of how they handle plastics and recycle and all of that. One thing that came up too is so we have Carnival, in the Caribbean, Trinidad, Tobago, other places, and a lot of plastic waste is generated there. How I know there's a company, aware of a company called Connie Cycle. She's been on here too, the owner. But on a national scale, how does, the country deal with that? How does Trinidad deal with the sort of plastic pollution that comes from Carnival? Anybody? I see a hand raised. You could unmute and speak.
Hi, thank you so much. Hoping you guys can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can.
Nice.
What,
Great. So
what's your name? What's your name?
I am Kima Gardner. I work as a waste management specialist in the Ministry of Planning and Economic Affairs and Development here in Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay.
So, very, very interesting presentation. Quite like the background, the insight. We have been, of course, following the INT negotiations to develop a legally binding treaty for plastics. So this information, I think, was very useful as well to feed into those deliberations. Regarding your question in terms of well, let me go first to Castara.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have current information in terms of what they have been doing, but I know that they did propose a no plastic styrofoam policy for their village, so
Right,
until yeah,
right.
to try to promote ecotourism in that regard. So
Yep.
I don't have a current status update in terms of efficacy, etc.
Mm-hmm.
On your question on the carnival costumes, yes, we do have Carnicycle as a local company. They have
Yep.
taken it upon themselves to try to recycle the costumes as fast as possible. What
Mm-hmm.
we have actually done at the national scale is recently started a project called Elimination of Hazardous Chemicals from Supply Chains. And so it's a global actual project. So it's a global initiative
Okay.
funded by the Global Environment Facility, the GEF.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it targets the construction sector as well as the fashion sector. So for Trinidad and Tobago, we targeted our carnival subsector, fashion industry there.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is to, as I indicated, remove hazardous chemicals from supply chains. And so the project recently initiated in July or so, we had a launch, and the
Mm-hmm.
idea being to try to promote use of alternative materials, to put in place reverse supply chains, of course, testing the current current materials, etc., that we have to
Mm-hmm.
see how they can be reintegrated, building capacity, building knowledge, etc. So we are trying to see what we can do at the national scale to try to address this issue.
So I'm glad you spoke up because I could see you as a future speaker. So
Oh,
please,
oh.
or please, you could do it individually, or you can be part of a team from, you said, the Ministry of Planning
Planning, yeah.
that talks about this topic. Um, our schedule is fixed for this entire year, meaning all the way through like May of next year. But uh, please reach out to me, send me your email contact. Yeah, we could have you and colleagues speak about it because it's a very important issue, especially in small island nations. So
Yeah, certainly. This is something that can be considered. It can, of course, be done in conjunction with other colleagues, as you suggested.
yeah.
So the Basel Convention Regional Center for Training and Capacity Development for the Caribbean,
Hmm.
which is hosted by the government of Trinidad and Tobago, is
Hmm.
a regional center that does capacity development work for the
Hmm.
countries in the Caribbean region that are party to the Basel, Stockholm, and Rotterdam conventions. So essentially the Chemicals and Waste Conventions, and the Manamata as well. And so
Okay.
They are the executing agency for this project. So it'd be useful to probably have them as well alongside other colleagues who are members of the project steering committee, perhaps do a presentation for you guys.
All right. So since we have you, could you help us make those connections?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. You're not gonna get away scot-free, okay? You,
Well noted. I think for
we
us as
we
well,
totally appreciate you sharing this information with you, and we want to build upon it because it's a very important topic.
yeah, no, certainly. And I think, of course, with the understanding that Trinidad and Tobago's carnival has influences on so many other carnivals as well. So I
Right.
think the learnings, etc., the traction we're able to make on this project would be useful for
Other
sharing to the
countries.
other locations as well. So,
Yeah, that's true. So maybe Brazil may be another place where they're trying to deal with this problem, the Brazilian carnival.
I'm not too sure about it. The project
Oh, okay.
countries that are part of the integrated program at the global scale doesn't include Brazil right now, but of course, I
Okay.
don't know at a national level what they may be doing in that regard.
Okay. All right. Very good. That's why I pressed for comments from our Caribbean people because that was a really good contribution right there to our discussion. Any other questions, comments?
In terms of ultimate recycling, the news that I have heard is that it's really not happening because some things get sent or supposed to go to certain places and they maybe dump it at sea or just end up in landfills. I'm just wondering how efficient or how successful the whole recycling process is happening because it is something that sounds very desirable, but is it how successfully is it happening? How
Are you
successfully?
talking about in the Caribbean? What?
No, sorry, worldwide,
Oh,
because
worldwide.
yeah,
Okay.
because we've heard stories of rich countries selling their waste to poor countries,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
it ends up in landfills, and people there start going in to try to the poor people to see what they can
Yeah.
get salvage, and
Yeah.
sometimes get hurt because of the things which are in it
Yeah.
because there's not
Yeah.
proper
That is a problem.
separation and so on. So I'm
Yep.
just wondering, are we making progress with, or to what extent are we making progress with ultimately recycling things?
Hmm.
I mean, there's still like work being done on how to more efficiently do it and how do we get there. A lot of it, though, comes down to waste management, right? So when you collect it, if we're collecting it as a at point, how are they being sorted? And then how does it be? And it's hard to speak to that because some countries are better at it than others. Some regions in the United States are better at sorting and recycling than others. Some have more capabilities. So are we getting better at it? There's improvements, but it's a long way to go. And one thing to know though is your number ones, your soda bottles, that is one of the most recycled materials. So that one for sure gets recycled a lot.
Okay.
Twos and fours, twos tend to be a lot of your plastic film material. Those don't get recycled as much because of the lightweightness, right? So
Okay.
it's hard to collect enough of it. Um, Fives that's your polypropylene. That's been a contentious one because in the United States, there aren't many recycling locations that actually will recycle a number five. So some of it has to do with your local waste management, but then you look at Europe and their capabilities are very different and they're more efficient at it. So it still needs to be worked on. I think it's a twofold. It could be better, but it's not nothing, right? So don't
Mhm.
again, this comes back to the like a little bit on the greenwashing. Recycling doesn't work. That's not true. And there's like we need to continue to push on our local areas to be better about it because it can be done. And there is innovation on even making recycling better in terms of like the end product. So it's not where it could be, but it's no, it's also made some progress.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Right.
to speak to your point, I live in the Northeast where you don't get plastic bags. And then I go and visit down further south and they give me plastic bags.
Yeah.
Or I go
Well,
to different countries, like you
different
mentioned
countries
Europe.
don't even, yeah, so
They
it's just,
don't even do plastic straws, you know, they do paper straws
right.
and so on. So it is true, it's regional.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So this was a very good, very information science-based presentation. Maybe for some of our audience, it triggered your memories of chemistry, which are often not pleasant, but hopefully realizing how important it is in our daily lives, to at least be a little bit more informed about the things that we use. And as we mentioned, microplastics is in everything. Yes, we in our food, we ingest it. So it's really important. And we want to thank our guest speaker, Joanna, who I just met months now, just
I know.
yeah, a few months ago, and we've been in good contact and stuff. Also want to thank our two co-hosts, Lashita. I didn't hear much from Lashita during the conversation. Did you have any comments?
No, I didn't really feel like I had a lot to add. There was a lot of good information there, and
Yeah, there
it's
was.
good to have
Yes,
some folks with some scientific background talking about how things are made and how they are repurposed or how they end up where they do. It's always good to have additional information, so thank you.
yes. And also, Julia Chambers, thank you so very much. And as we always say here, basically, the information that we have here in this live stream is something that you could access on your own time. It's going to be up on YouTube by the end of the day, in a few hours probably. So you will be able to access it and go through it at a slower pace. So thanks again to everyone. If it's Friday, it's Environmental Fridays. It is personal. See you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks and bye.
Thank
Thank you very
you.
much.
Bye bye.